Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to advise you that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports to council, standing or advisory committee meetings for information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a specific request of this meeting, please contact cwc@london.ca. Please be advised that the City of London offices are currently closed and to appointment only due to the provincial lockdown orders. We do have quorum for this meeting with Councillor Van Meerbergen, Councillor Turner, Helmer, and myself. So I'm calling this meeting to order and looking for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to item 2.11, the 2020 Drinking Water Annual Report and System Report for the Drinking Water Summary, I declare pecuniary interest as my agency, the Middlesex London Health Unit, has some intersection with the oversight of the water system within the City of London.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other pecuniary interests to be stated? Okay, seeing none, looking to the consent items and items that anyone would like pulled. Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, if I could have 2.7 pulled, please.
Okay. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to vote on 2.5 separately, and if you could pull 2.6.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I currently have item 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, and 2.11 pulled. Is there anything further from committee that they would like pulled in the consent items? Okay, seeing none, I will put the remainder of the items on the floor. And looking to committee for your wishes of questions and comments to staff that you would like done. In item 2.1, I'll just draw your attention to the chair of Mr. Foster being elected as chair and Mr. Khan being elected as vice chair. And the committee has requested if we had any specific feedback as their attached work plan to please make that known. If not, committee will approve the work plan and advise TAC that they can move forward with it. Councillor Helmer?
I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the items that are in the consent motion. On 2.2, first, very glad to see that the micro tunneling went through without a lot of problems. Some colleagues will recall, and I'm sure the staff will remember the micro tunneling that we had to do in Ward 4 into Ward 1 under the train tracks, and those projects can be fraught with a lot of difficulty and risk, and the fact that that was done successfully, I think is no small thing. And I just wanted to comment on that. I think that's a really important step in that overall project, which is going to resolve the flooding that happens north of Oxford Street. I think it's a really important project. I know a lot of these engineering projects kind of under the radar in terms of their level of importance, but this one is a very important one. I wanted to say good work on that. Glad to see it moving ahead. On 2.3, this is the Carling Creek stormwater servicing. This is an issue that is of serious concern for a lot of residents who are south of the CP train tracks in particular. We have a lot of surface flooding that overwhelms the capacity of the roads during rainfall events. And as you know, there's been more and more intense storms over the past few years in particular. And I can remember times where people were canoeing in the street. We had so much water in the roadway, not too far from where we're building a brand new park. And so there's actually a lot of problems with the storm capacity in this area. And, the price tag for that first new trunk storm sewer obviously was very high when that came forward. And I think looking at alternatives, seeing what can be done, trying to figure out a way to address some of these flooding issues, mitigate those impacts of climate change, but use the money really effectively, I think is really, really important. So this is another step forward on that one. And I'm glad to see that happening. And then just on 2.8 and 2.9, I think these are important projects and I'm glad to see them going ahead.
Thank you for that. Any other comments for the consent items from committee members? Okay, seeing none, just to note item 2.12, the London Community Recovery Network. All committees are having different ideas put on this round of agenda items. So if you haven't already seen them, take a look. And with that, I'll need a mover and a seconder for the remaining consent items of 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.8, 2.9, 2.10, 2.12, and 2.13. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner, and eScribe is going to be open for your pleasure in a moment.
So you gonna call me again for the other stuff?
I will.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, next I'll need a mover and a seconder to put item 2.15 forward. It's the contract award tender for the downtown loop and municipal infrastructure improvements for phase 1. Okay, moved by the Mayor and seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Van Merbergen had wished for this one to be pulled, and Ms. Dan is with us today if committee would like an update of where we're at and next steps. So Ms. Dan, I'd ask you if there's anything you want to highlight in that before we open it up to questions from the rest of the committee.
Through the chair, I'd just like to say that, our team is glad to be seeing the first phase of the rapid transit projects forward. We had a clean award that we're very happy with. We've checked it, no irregularities, and we're happy to see it move forward.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And looking for questions in regards to item 2.5 from committee. Councillor Hummer?
Thank you. I just wonder if Ms. Dan could walk us through, for this first phase, what people should expect to see in terms of the work that's going to be done, both above grade and below grade, once the project gets underway.
Absolutely. Through the chair, this project is going to cover 4 blocks of King Street. So it's going to span from Rideout Street to Wellington Street. And I'm going to break that into 2 sections to describe it because the scope of work changes on either end. So for the westerly section from Rideout to Richmond, those 2 blocks, there's not a lot of underground infrastructure that needs to be replaced. So it's going to be mostly surface works. We should be able to maintain at least 1 lane of traffic during that period of construction, keep activity open, and manage things through that area. The second 2 blocks, the section from Richmond to Wellington, does include quite a lot of underground deep infrastructure. We have sewer separation works that need to be done in that section, so it will be more disruptive. We're breaking it down into 4 subsections to again try to maintain access as much as possible to businesses and properties along that stretch while we work. And that through that section, we'll probably be busy for the entire construction season. But again, we'll be trying to break it down and create manageable chunks. From a construction management plan, we're going to be trying to mitigate traffic impacts by directing traffic and vehicles to York Street for a detour and sending cyclists over to Dundas Place. And through that, we hope to be able to manage the construction traffic impacts as well.
A follow-up at all from Councillor Helmer? No. Councillor Turner?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, Ms. Dan. Interested just in terms of the complexity associated with the construction through the underpasses at City Plaza. Does that add elements of challenge, or I'd imagine so, not having the aerial space to be able to work under there?
Through the chair, yes, we did have some discussions through the tendering and design process to make sure there was a constructability aspect that could be managed through that. And one of the things we were able to do that really helped us out was look at some creative solutions around our sanitary sewer through there. So we were actually able to eliminate a sewer through that section, which also helps us in terms of our constructability. So we have looked at that, and we're going to be able to manage it very carefully, but we can do that section.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions or comments from committee? Okay. Seeing none, I'll just comment that I'm also glad to see that there's stormwater separation of another 0.4 kilometers part of this, and the city will have staff reaching out and coordinating with businesses as well for open feedback as they move forward this, and coordinating with cyclists and active transportation users throughout this as the city does the downtown plans. Seeing as it's already been duly moved and seconded, eScribe will be now open for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Thank you. We're moving on to item 2.6, which is the new sidewalks in 2021 infrastructure reconstruction projects. We have Mr. McCray with us today to speak to it, as well as Councillor Squire. I will go to committee first, just for procedural, but recognizing Councillor Squire has many residents who have been writing us, I think he could provide some insight. Okay, Councillor Squire, please proceed.
Thank you very much, and thanks for recognizing me. What I'm hoping to do today is to sort of provide a path forward to hear the residents in an orderly fashion on what their concerns were, and just very briefly in terms of background, the full awareness of the nature of what was going to be happening, and the proposal for sidewalks in streets in the Orchard Park neighborhood sort of crystallized in the neighborhood on Thursday, Friday when the agenda came out. So since that date, I've received a lot of emails, many more than the committee has received, although the committee I think has received 19. what I've done since then is I've met with the community, I've explained the delegation process, and what I've done and what I'm hoping to continue to do is encourage them to have their delegations in sort of an organized manner. In other words, not every person in Orchard Park subdivision want to speak to the committee and express a point of view where it's being repeated by the organized groups within the committee. So with that in mind, I did speak to staff in terms of timing, because it's of course important that these projects move ahead in whatever their manner they're going to move ahead. So in that regard, I spoke to Mr. McCrae, and the course forward that's being proposed is certainly through this process is that the delegations be moved and heard at the next Civic Works meeting. And that will give the community an opportunity to bring these delegations together in an organized manner, make them to the committee, and have the committee make a decision. The issue that is clear to me is that there's a high level of interest and concern. And of course, it's a normal practice of every committee to approve delegations and have the delegations heard. My concerns were twofold: was that they be organized, presented in an orderly fashion to the committee. That can happen on, I think it's March 2nd. But don't be surprised if you get more emails before your next meeting and more correspondence. But I will do my best and undertake to do so as a councillor to make sure that those are courteous, they're organized, they're factual, to address the issues at hand. Mr. McCrae has indicated that that is a time frame that works for staff. In other words, if the committee in its wisdom says there are going to be sidewalks on those streets in Orchard Park, staff will be able to proceed without delay. So for me, that's the most organized and appropriate path forward. I know the clerk's prepared motions in that regard. And I've done my best at this point in time to make sure that the committee is not put in a position of having to respond in this time to what could be 30 or 40 delegation requests. So that's where I am and what I'm hoping to accomplish today, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Squire, and for joining us today, and all your work over the weekend and the last few days dealing with constituents and helping them with the path forward through this. I do have a speakers list. I have Mr. Mayor, followed by Councillor Van Merbergen.
Thanks very much, Chair. I concur with Councillor Squire with regard to the issues around the public participation meetings. I think that's going to be very helpful for council to understand what the concerns of the various neighborhoods are. Obviously, this goes beyond Orchard Park. I too have received quite a number of letters of concern by impacted residents. And not just, by the way, that because and I don't want to preempt their comments, not just because some feel with older neighborhoods that have been around a long time that sidewalks may or may not have a role. The ones I've heard from do not feel that they do, but some concerns about trees and all as a result of the placement of sidewalks. So with all of that and the displacement of trees as a result, mature trees and the like. So I look forward to hearing from citizens across the city that have those specific concerns in those areas that have been impacted as a result of this. So like Councillor Squire, I look forward to the public participation meeting so we can get a full understanding of what their concerns are, and then we'll respond accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll have Councillor Van Merbergen, followed by Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, this is an issue that is popping up time and time again. It's affected several wards across the city, if not all of them. It seems to me that the path that we're on now is simply not working. Every time there's a proposal to impose sidewalks into mature areas, there is significant pushback. And I think a lot of that is because we're following a path where we're imposing the will of the city instead of consulting the way we used to. The city used to, through staff, identify the most important streets that would qualify for a sidewalk and then invite public feedback, basically almost a vote on a per street basis to see if there was interest. If there wasn't interest, it would move on to another street on the list. Now we're saying, hey, you're getting a sidewalk, whether you like it or not. And it's not working. We've seen it time and time again, just in the 2 years of this particular council, the pushback. So I would certainly agree with Councillor Squire and the mayor that we have a mechanism currently that the public can come back to us and state their cases, in many cases very well founded. Again, I see streets here that are not just in Councillor Squire's ward. I've got one in my own ward. I see various wards here on this current list, and I would be happy to support a motion that this be brought back at the next Civic Works Committee.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to Councillor Squire for bringing this forward. I think his comments are quite reasoned and appropriate. I'm willing to move the motion to entertain delegations at the next Civic Works meeting. I think that's quite reasonable. I think what we need to do is separate a few of the issues here too, though. Councillor Van Meerbergen was just talking about what sounded like the warranted sidewalk program. And there are two different programs here. There's the warranted sidewalk program and there's the complete streets program. This is a complete streets program. This isn't the warranted sidewalks program. We do continue to do the warranted sidewalks program where we identify sidewalks by list of priority. Where we do road infrastructure within a neighborhood, we take a look as we're going through to make sure that all the elements and street treatments that are associated with that project are contemplated in one go so that we save the cost of going back later and looking at these from the warranted sidewalk program aspect. So given the neighborhood concerns that we've heard in the past, it looks like this this document, as it's been put forward, is a framework for us to be able to consider how to evaluate the challenges that the neighborhoods have voiced in the past. And I think it's a very comprehensive document. I think it's quite appropriate. It makes a lot of sense to me. It lists the projects for this year, but I think it just does that as part of filling out this document a little bit more. The question of the projects themselves versus the question of the framework that is being used to evaluate these projects are two separate ones. And so as those projects come up, there continues to be those opportunities for engagement. The neighborhoods get their letters. And in that it says who to contact and how to engage on the issues and items so that the neighborhood considerations can be taken into account as those projects move forward. But the framework itself, I think, is quite reasonable for us to move forward with and for us to endorse at this point. I think that's what's being asked of us here. The projects themselves on an individual basis, if neighborhoods and residents in those projects wish to raise concerns or issues, the prerogative always exists to come to this committee or to council through other mechanisms by writing or otherwise. And that's, I don't read that this is removing that from that process at all. One of the things I think is really important in some of the discussions, and perhaps this might be a question, I think perhaps through you to Mr. McCrae, is how we do that engagement. There's various levels of public participation and public engagement. There's us informing people that something's going to happen. There's us consulting. There's us kind of empowering, and in that spectrum, there's different levels of neighborhood I guess empowerment in that, right? So we can tell them we're doing something because we've got to do something, right? If there's a water main break, we're going to tell people we're going to fix that water main break. We're probably not going to consult, and we're probably not going to put it up for a vote to fix that. We've just got to be able to let people know you're not going to be able to go down this road right now while we're fixing it. There's other places where we do full empowerment, and we do that at elections, or we do that through the referendum process for parking on streets, for example. Where we give issues, we allow the residents to be able to vote on whether they wish to have parking on that or on that street section or not, or the parameters of that parking. there's parts where we participate and where we do public information centers, or as they used to be called, where we might have people in, we'll talk about some of the things, we'll scope some of the work, and we'll use a lot of that input to frame how it comes through. I think what we need to do though, and my point in all of this is how well do we frame what point in the decision making and involvement do we have with the community? And how clear are we to say that we are informing you right now, or we are completely empowering, or we're participating or consulting? And I think that kind of thermometer or gas gauge on the continuum of public participation is really important for all these projects. So they say, okay, these are the scopes that we have to do. We have to replace your sewer pipes. These are the components of it that we have some latitude to be able to discuss with you to say, yeah, this goes or not, or it can go here or not there. I think that's always a challenge in public participation, and perhaps through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. McCrae, how might we be able to address these things going forward so that we can clearly articulate what decision points are for us and for the community?
Thank you for that. I will go to Mr. McCrae to perhaps even start with like how this list of projects is determined, like what is reconstruction projects, and then how residents will be engaged throughout it and have a chance for feedback and what level of feedback as per Councillor Turner's question. Mr. McCrae?
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, so the rollout of the neighborhood reconstruction projects, these complete streets projects, really originates with asset management and keeping our assets in serviceable and working condition to serve the public. So when we approach them from a complete streets perspective, we're guided by the London Plan policies and best practices with respect to the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And it talks about removing barriers, and the London Plan is very specific with respect to sidewalk implementation on streets. So these projects are not subject to council approval, but we know because of the interest that we receive from neighborhoods that there is broad interest. And so this year we've come with this report as an additional touch, an extra touch point to keep council and others informed and aware of the projects. We certainly endeavor to consult on our work and continuously improve that process. Given that we're proposing changes to these neighborhood streets, the public consultation with the neighborhoods has flowed in the past, and that is planned for the current cycle this year. Given COVID restrictions, it needs to be done in virtual formats as opposed to our traditional face-to-face meetings at public venues. But that process is still in place that will provide the public information and an opportunity to feedback. So there's different aspects to it, as the councillor alludes to, in that the application of policy, as staff, we don't really have a lot of leeway in that the London Plan policy identifies the need for a sidewalk. However, there's a lot of different aspects to the construction, to the design of the project and how it rolls out to the community. And there's certainly value in that feedback mechanism with the neighborhood. So the communities in which these projects are located will be receiving additional information on the projects, and that will fit with the proposed approach that Councillor Squire has mentioned, and so the residents will be better and more informed prior to the next Civic Works date.
A follow-up question or comment, Councillor Turner?
Yeah, thank you to Mr. McCrae. I appreciate that response. I think my motion would be that that we endorse the plan as proposed here and provide that public participation opportunity, or that delegation opportunity at the next meeting. These are two independent things. We're not approving this list. What we're doing is approving the framework for how these are considered.
Okay, the clerk's just working on that, and I'll go to Councillor Squire and then Councillor Van Meerbergen and then the mayor.
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate the depth that Councillor Turner went into this, and I think he hit on something that I think is could be a problem for all councillors, and it's this, that basically the agenda for this meeting came out on a Wednesday. In my practice, I don't read my agenda sort of right away. I plead guilty to that. So the community association in Orchard Park, Sherwood Forest, which is headed by Sandy Levin, is a very active, and he actually reads all the agendas for all the meetings going to council. So what he did was he sent out an email copying me saying, hey, this is on the agenda next week of Civic Works. And that was really the first notice that the neighborhood, I think, had. And to say that it caused that the panic it caused was, how do we have an opportunity to have our say on this? And I think that's the issue that all of us as councillors should be interested in this program as it goes forward, because this is an issue that's going to resurface over and over again. And if you look at some of the emails, they want to know why it's why this is happening in such a short time frame. So I think Mr. McCrae gets that. I just hope for the rest of us and other councillors, and we've all had it. Councillor Turner's had it. Councillor Cassidy's had it. Many of us have had it. We just want that opportunity for our constituents to come to the committee, make their submissions, and have a decision after they've done that. I think the worst thing that can happen to any of us is that decisions are being made and afterwards constituents are coming to us saying, I didn't know about that. And why wasn't I asked? So I really appreciate what Councillor Turner had to say about that. And I don't want to get into the merits of the case. This is the lawyer speaking. We're adjourning it, so we'll get into the merits when it comes back to Civic Works, and I appreciate that opportunity, and I appreciate the way the committee is getting it in terms of public input.
Thank you. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you. Perhaps I could ask Mr. McCrae if all of the streets that are listed on page 38 and 39 have been notified that they are on the docket for a new sidewalk for their street. Have they been notified at this point?
Mr. McCrae, if you can answer that and next steps and how we proceed from here.
Some of the neighborhoods typically become aware of projects with the issuance of a letter when surveying occurs in the prior year, typically that sort of time frame. So there tends to be awareness of the project. Design details such as sidewalks typically flow later, and that information is queued up and ready to go for most of these projects. There is a project or two in this list that information was shared last year, and then the timing subsequently changed. So there is some awareness for some of the projects, but certainly not all. But that information and the presence of the sidewalk is highlighted in project information that will flow to the communities in the very near future.
Follow-up question, Councillor Van Meerbergen.
So my concern here is there are a couple of streets that seem to be well aware of what's happening and what's coming into the future. But my concern is all of the streets may not be aware. And I think it's important that they be made aware, particularly prior to the meeting on March the 2nd, so that they have an opportunity to voice their position on the potential of a sidewalk. So what I'm asking is it possible for the department to send out something by mail or hand delivery that explains that there's a sidewalk potentially coming to that street and that they can participate if they wish on March the 2nd? Is that doable and possible?
Mr. McCrae.
Yeah, as mentioned previously, thank you through the chair. The communications and consultation with the neighborhoods is planned in the very near term. So before the next Civic Works Committee meeting, that will share information on project design and the presence of sidewalks.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Van Meerbergen, and then
so
it'll be Councillor Holder after that, or Mr. Mayor after that.
Okay, and I just want to, I wasn't quite sure if I heard that you would also mention that they have an opportunity to speak on March the 2nd. Will that be put in as part of the information flyer or the letter?
The application of policy approved design principles, tends to flow based with the project information. As we can, there is no formal public participation meeting planned at the next Civic Works Committee. So we hadn't planned to advertise a public meeting per se, but I think residents are generally aware of their ability to contact councillors, and we certainly see that occurring in past years, and it's something that's shared on a as request basis as the issues arise.
Yeah,
we can certainly share that information as requested.
So March, just for clarity here, as we're a little bit in circles and we have a lot going on for conversations, I do have a speakers list that's growing. As we approve the delegation status for March 2nd, it would be from the people who already requested delegation status. It is not set to be a public participation meeting. Mr. McCrae has stated prior that we are working within a construction season, and whatever construction we're trying to get done is also being done before migratory birds return. So there is those project timelines as well to be mindful of as we move forward. The clerk is just having taken Councillor Turner's wording combined with what we had prepared in advance. We'll be emailing that to the committee for you can see it. And once it is done, I will read it out as well, recognizing we have guests here and people viewing. So I will return to Councillor Van Meerbergen for his comments. Then I have the Mayor, Councillor Cassidy, and Councillor Turner.
Again, I think as this becomes more public about the number of streets that will be affected this construction season, we're going to be seeing a lot more requests for delegation status for the next meeting. So I think we all have to be aware of that fact. And I'd also like to ask, with this current motion that was presented by Councillor Turner, if we could have that split into two, so we can vote on two different parts. So the endorsement part of the main motion, and if we could vote separately as well on the referral to the next meeting for delegation.
Okay, I will ask the clerk to read out the wording and put it on the screen as well. So just a moment for that, as we'll also be receiving the communications that have already been sent to committee.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Your Worship.
I apologize because I have to excuse myself for the Big City Mayors Conference in Canada. So I won't be in a position to vote for this, but I would say the way that I have seen it on the screen right now is not that the framework be endorsed, because I thought we actually had a framework that would be a moot point, but that the report from staff be received, and the second part that various communications be received as well, which I would have been prepared to support. But you'll excuse me because I do have to take a call, and I'm just a few minutes delayed from that. So if you'll forgive me, and to fellow committee members, I'm sorry that I have to excuse myself at this point.
Thank you. We wish you productive meetings the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the clerk is just looking for clarification, Councillor Turner, as the report was to be received as staff. It was more of an information report, so they're looking for received versus endorsed. Is either wording okay with you, Councillor Turner?
Madam Chair, I am good with whatever, but the recommendation on the agenda, on the cover sheet says be endorsed. So I was just
Yes.
going with what the staff wording was.
Perfect, thank you for that. And staff yesterday at our pre-meeting did point out that they meant to put received versus endorsed. So thank you for your flexibility. The clerk is just changing that wording. Okay, the clerk is just putting it up and it'll be read, and then I'll have Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Turner on the speakers list.
That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Environmental and Engineering Services and City Engineer, the following actions be taken with respect to the staff report dated February 9th, 2021, related to new sidewalks in 2021 infrastructure reconstruction projects. Part A, the above noted staff report be received. Part B, the requests for delegation by the following individuals with respect to this matter be approved for a future meeting of the Civic Works Committee. And there's a list of names. Part C, the communications from the following individuals with respect to this matter be received, and there's a list of names.
Perfect, thank you for that. Moving on to the next speaker on the list, Councillor Cassidy, and then I'll have Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a lot of the comments have been made, so if I feel the need to jump in again, I will. I do also want to thank Councillor Squire for managing this extremely well for his constituents and for the committee as well. So looking forward to moving ahead with this, and I'm happy to second Councillor Turner's motion as well.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll have Councillor Turner and then Councillor Squire.
Thank you. No, my point was really just to emphasize that this was for approval for delegation status, not a public participation meeting. So I think that's been reiterated. So I'm good there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Squire, and then Councillor Van Merbergen.
Yeah, just thanks very much to the committee, and I think it's something that will benefit us all in the future if we develop sort of a process how we deal with this. The other thing is just in terms of other councillors, I know Councillor Lehman and Councillor Van Meerbergen are probably thinking about streets where their constituents haven't gotten in touch with us yet. The clerk certainly made me aware that if a delegation request came to council and it was sent before February 19th by 9 a.m., then it would be put on the council agenda so that we could add another delegation if one came up from a street that's not yet had questions about it. So there's still that opportunity. So I'm with the committee. I don't want to confuse a public participation meeting with hearing delegations. You know, what the committee will be doing is hearing delegations, but I think it's up to us as councillors, and we're going to have to inform our constituents and say, look, you still have an opportunity if you want to be a delegate, but you've got to get it to council before February 19th. But one of the things I'm going to try to do is make sure that there aren't too many delegations. In other words, I'm not going to be supportive of saying to my community, I'd like I'd like 50 people to say the same thing. I think there's community associations that can do that. So I really appreciate it today. I think this is one of the few meetings that I'll go away from where Councillor Turner and I agreed on everything. And this breaks my heart, but you know, it's something that had to happen, I guess, eventually.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I'm also giving credit to a really good chair who's still being broken in.
That goes without saying.
Okay, I do have Councillor Van Merbergen as the final speaker on the current list.
Thank you. Okay, that clarifies. Thank you to Councillor Squire, because my question was, as the word gets out and people are requesting delegation status, can that be added, even though they're not put in the motion today? So it sounds like, yes, they can, as long as it's prior to February the 19th. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. My second point is no need to break it into 2 parts or 3 parts for this motion, since we're just receiving. Originally, it looked like we were endorsing, so receiving is fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So when it is time, we will put A, B, and C together. The clerk has clarified that the date is February 17th for people to have their communications in by, not the 19th. And the next Civic Works meeting is March the 2nd, in which we'll receive the delegates, if approved by council. Counselor Cassidy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have in the past voted at a meeting to approve a delegation request. That has happened at that meeting. So they've notified the clerk in advance of the meeting that they have a delegation request. It gets put on the added agenda, and we have voted at that very meeting at various standing committees. So we've done it in the past where we've had pretty short notice on a delegation request and approved that delegation request. So I just wanted to say that. I also want to say, you know, the staff are doing this a little bit differently this year in recognition of the fact that these some of these things have come forward to Civic Works when we're in the design phase or in the pre-construction phase of these projects. So Councillor, residents have had an opportunity to be heard. It hasn't been organized, and I appreciate Councillor Squire making this organized and trying to put some kind of process in place. But personally, I've met with lots of different residents and talked to them about proposed sidewalks in their neighborhood, and they've never come to committee because I've talked to them through it. We've worked with staff. Staff have made accommodations to the neighborhood to spare as many trees as possible, but we come together with the community and staff and myself, we have made the case in most cases why the sidewalk was necessary and got to some degree community buy-in. I'm not saying everybody was cheering and saying rah rah, but you know, especially in the case of a sidewalk near Lucas High School, the community was not happy about it, but it was without any denial a direct route to Lucas High School for quite a number of students walking to and from school every single day. So managed to get the community somewhat on board on that. So it never came to committee. So there are lots of opportunities when we're doing our jobs as counselors, as Councillor Squire is doing, to engage the community and work with them. And in some of the rare cases, they actually come before Civic Works and then before council for a decision on a particular location. So I do appreciate the idea examining a way to make this a more thoughtful process so that people do feel engaged, so they don't feel like they're scrambling at the last minute and they're not being heard. But as far as delegation requests go, we can vote at the next meeting for people that aren't even on this list yet.
Okay, thank you. And the clerk would like to make a comment, and then I will recognize Councillor Lehman after the clerk.
Thank you, through the chair. I just want to point out that the difficulty with approving delegations at the current meeting is the virtual meeting format. So that's why these delegations were not considered for this meeting, and that we don't know yet what the next Civic Works meeting may or may not look like, and that will somewhat depend on provincial orders and the status of the opening of City Hall for public access. So there is some difficulty with that. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you for those comments as we go through this together and lead in public service to the best of our abilities in a very changing workplace. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is the timing on this. You know, that gives my constituents 8 days to get a delegation request in. Most of them are just finding out about this now. So I just want to be clear, and through you, Chair, to the clerk. If people do not have a chance to get together and organize to see if they even want a delegation by February 17th, will that window be extended until, you know, March 2nd? If by then they have spoken to, you know, their associations and neighbors to see if they want a delegation, will they be allowed to speak at the March 2nd meeting if they miss the February 17th deadline?
I'll go to the clerk.
Thank you, through the chair. The deadline of February 17th at noon is for communications for the council agenda for the meeting to be held on February the 23rd. That will be the same meeting that the report from this Civic Works Committee goes forward and would, or it may, approve the delegations that are currently being considered by the committee at this time. The next Civic Works Committee meeting is March the 2nd. The deadline for a submission for that committee meeting would be Monday, February the 22nd at 9 a.m. However, we don't know if we would be able to accommodate delegations at that meeting that weren't previously approved because of our virtual format. I hope that helps clarify.
Councillor Lehman, do you have a follow-up question or comment?
Well, I do, because I'm still not clear. So I'm hearing now all sorts of dates. So the February 17th at noon is the deadline to present to the Civic Works meeting on February the 23rd. Is that correct, Clerk?
Almost. February 17th is the deadline for the council agenda on February 23rd, at which all of these delegation requests would be considered.
Okay.
If a submission wants to be made for the March 2nd agenda of the Civic Works, the deadline for that is February 22nd at 9 a.m. But we don't yet know what that committee meeting format will look like, whether or not they would be able to attend City Hall and wait to know if they would be approved live in the meeting.
So through you, Chair. So there's a council meeting on February 23rd and request for a delegation to that council meeting. The cutoff is February 17th at noon. But there's a second chance to present to City Hall, and that would be the Civic Works meeting on March the 2nd, and the cutoff for that is February 22nd. Am I clear?
That's correct. At the February, I would like to add though, through the chair, at the March 2nd Civic Works Committee meeting, delegation requests could be heard, approved to be heard at a future meeting again. So it wouldn't necessarily be that additional delegations would be approved for the meeting of the 2nd of March at the 2nd of March.
Through you, Chair. So let's say people can't get organized in 8 days to see who's going to speak to what. So they're going to aim for February 22nd to request a delegation status. And at the March 2nd Civic Works meeting, that delegation status would be approved but not heard. Is that correct? And it'll be set for a future meeting?
Sorry, I'll go to the clerk. Just for clarification on that, then I'll make a comment as well.
Thank you, through the chair. We just don't know yet what the meeting on March the 2nd will look like. If it's entirely virtual, approving a delegation live in the meeting is problematic.
Thank you for that. As always, I will remind all councillors that everyone is welcome to send their correspondence in writing to us. We will approve delegations at committees will, regardless if we're like this, it will have to be a future meeting. If we're physically back to some small capacity, we'll be able to accommodate that here. And the ward councillor is always welcome to speak. I'll always recognize you at the committees that I chair, and then you can bring those questions and comments forward for a full discussion, as Councillor Squire did today, of feedback and what you've been doing behind the scenes. Staff's always available. As Mr. McCray pointed out, with the project management going forward, residents will be engaged. And as they work through the site plans, tree impacts of what can and can't be saved will be made clear. Recognizing some trees go just because of root impacts, regardless if there's a sidewalk going in or not, which residents don't always recognize. Counselor Lehman, your hand is down, but do you have a follow-up, or are you okay for right now?
Well, I still feel that we don't have enough time for my constituents to get together. However, it appears to be a window open if people cannot make it within 8 days to get organized. I think, as Councillor Squire touched on, and Councillor Van Meerbergen, I think we need to look at down the road at changing this process, because it just seems to be a bit rushed, and I think it could be organized a bit better to make sure that all constituents have their say. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The motion has been moved and seconded. If there's no further comments, it was moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. So I think having an opportunity for the delegations to speak is a good idea. For myself, I'm interested to know about the specifics about where the sidewalk's going to be located and what the different alternatives might be. Curb facing, setback, south side versus north side. I won't bore colleagues with my reiteration of why I think sidewalks are an important part of every street. And certainly it is the most cost-efficient time to put a sidewalk in is when we're doing a road reconstruction project. So I think we're going to have delegations at this meeting, not just from other folks who are keen to see sidewalks built in our city, because we have had a lot of these conversations because we are not following the policy that we have in place, which is to build sidewalks either on both sides or on one side when there's constraints when we redo roads. And if we keep making exceptions to that, we're going to keep having lots and lots and lots of requests for exceptions, because generally speaking, people who are on the street don't really want a sidewalk, and people who don't live there and walk down the street or might want to walk down the street do want sidewalks. And we're going to have that tension over and over again. So I'm interested to hear what the folks who live on Friars Way have to say. I think they've done a good job of organizing already. We've spent almost an hour talking about hearing from them, and I look forward to hearing from them at our next meeting.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Cassidy, your hand's virtually up. Did you need anything, or can we call the vote? Perfect. There is no further questions that I'm seeing. It's been duly moved and seconded by Councillor Turner and then seconded by Councillor Cassidy. The vote will be open, and it will be A, B, and C together.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Yes,
Before
Councillor
I
Squire.
absent myself, I just want to really thank the committee for the way you dealt with this. It's very much appreciated. I hope some of my constituents, I actually asked them to watch today, and so they would understand the kind of discussions the committee has. And I think that's also really helpful. So good luck with the rest of your meeting. Take care.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us, and to your constituents who have been engaging with you. We look forward to hearing from them on the March 2nd. Item 2.7, stopping and parking restrictions in bicycle lanes. This is one that started in 2019 from this committee and then through council. Mr. McRae is with us to provide an overview if you'd prefer that first. Councillor Turner, you pulled it, so I'll look to your direction.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My question is just really about the difference between stopping zones and no parking zones, and whether we need to have that delineation between the two, or whether we can't just go to no stopping zones altogether. There are some constraints and specific parameters in no parking zones that don't, or no stopping zones that don't absolutely stop people from stopping. The exceptions are laid out in the report. If I recall, through some of the challenges in enforcement, just in general, no stopping zones, not even those on bike lanes, there are a fair breadth of permissions that allow for people to stop in stopping zones or no stopping zones, and a certain period of time that needs to elapse before we can ticket somebody for stopping in a no stopping zone. Perhaps through you to staff, Madam Chair, if I could just ask, why, and is it really a material difference between allowing for these no parking zones versus these no stopping zones? And I recognize the loading piece, but I'm not entirely convinced on that side of things.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Just also to note, Councillor Lewis has joined us as well, as him and I are the ones who brought this through Civic Works in the beginning, and have been working with Mr. Cray behind the scenes, eagerly waiting this report. Mr. McCray, I'll ask of you if you want to give an overview of what you looked into and how you came back with this, as it is a lengthy and detailed report towards the back, recognizing what roads specifically will be affected throughout the city, and then to get into the detail about no parking versus no stopping and how long you have for each of those items for no stopping and no parking.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it is in response to council direction and really looking at ways to improve the safety and operations of bicycle lanes while managing and mitigating impacts to adjacent property owners. So we came up with a framework that we've, based on sort of the best approach that works for cyclists, but also adjacent property owners. The difference between, I think the councillor understands, so the difference between no parking and no stopping really is no parking does allow for the loading and unloading of merchandise or passengers. So it's more lenient and a little more difficult to enforce. So a lot of it does come down to enforceability and some of the frustrations around, for example, say a landscaping type of service vehicle parked there, and how long they need to occupy the space, whereas the no stopping zone really removes a lot of the subjectivity of that. But Stephen Miller on the enforcement side is with us today, and I welcome him to add any comments if he cares to about how the transition to more no stopping zones can make this operate better.
Perfect. I will go to Mr. Miller then, of how the enforcement will work, how long we anticipate it would take a bylaw officer to get out to look at a situation that someone's called in and flagged for us, recognizing the city has also brought enforcement back in-house, and if that's going to help us at all in those parameters. Mr. Miller?
Thank you. Through the chair. Typically, when we receive a call, it takes about 10 to 20 minutes for the officer to respond. In a no parking zone, we usually provide a period of observation of about 10 to 15 minutes. With a no stopping violation, the officers are not required to observe that period, given the fact that the vehicle cannot be parked for the purpose of loading or unloading, and actually stopping is the offense.
Councillor, follow-up question about enforcement of how it's going to work in no parking and no stopping zones. Any questions with Mr. Miller still on the phone?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I think that's my concern, is that the enforcement of a no parking zone is infinitely more challenging than it is for a no stopping zone. We've identified that the cycling routes are right-of-ways. You wouldn't be able to just stop in the middle of the road and leave your car there for a little bit. So why can we do this on bike lanes? So I'm not really supportive, and I'm looking for a strong argument to say, why should I support implementing no parking zones in addition to the no stopping zones versus just a policy that's no stopping zones altogether?
Mr. McCray, did you want to make comments on what we had heard from some of the business communities or other concerns of recognizing how far it is between side streets, as some people are trying to load and unload. If you want to make comment on that, please do so.
Yeah, this item was, we consulted on it with the Transportation Advisory Committee and Cycling Advisory Committee, and there was a recognition out of the committees that the ideal is a no stopping zone applied throughout. However, we do, oftentimes these facilities are added in existing neighborhoods, so impacting, creating new impacts. So we try to apply some judgment wherever possible to give staff leeway to mitigate the impacts and make the projects more implementable. So but even applying the framework, the no stopping, so the more enforceable and more effective regulation is the more predominant one. It applies to most of the bike lanes, and it's somewhat on an exception basis where adjacent property owners have limited opportunities. So farther to get to a side street or no driveway access where we would apply the less stringent requirement.
Councillor Turner?
Follow-up question, if I might then, are where those places that don't have driveways, they may not have street-facing driveways, but they may have lane-facing driveways. There are alternatives. There aren't a lot of properties that don't have vehicular access opportunities outside of the street itself. Is that correct, or are these places that just don't have any options at all?
You are correct. The number of bike lanes, or the length of bike lanes adjacent to properties with no driveways, there's not a lot of examples of them. That's quite a rare exception, but it is, upon observations, we just thought it wouldn't be clear to perhaps to a service looking to make a delivery of the laneway type of access. So that was why that exception was drawn up, but it tends to be quite limited and localized.
Okay, thanks. I'll be interested to hear the rest of the comments from my colleagues, but this is an area of concern for me. I think it probably should just be universally no stopping, but I leave myself to be convinced.
Perfect. Thank you. Looking to the rest of the committee or visiting councillors who wish to make comment or questions on this item. I'm not seeing anyone. I'll kind of do like a last call. Oh, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to raise my concern about the blanket sort of policies that often have unintended consequences. So I hope that we can come up with something where it's mostly can guide us to play nice, and I think that should address most of the troubles. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Lewis, welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to try and be really brief. I actually, Councillor Turner's having a 2-for-1 day. First, he and Councillor Squire agreed, and now he and I agree. I'm not sure that, the mixed approach is necessarily the best, although I do hear what staff are saying, where we are putting bike lanes in well-established neighborhoods, and we may have, businesses operating out of, converted dwellings and those kind of things. So I'm torn on this one, and I'm frustrated because honestly, it seems every time I go downtown, I see delivery vehicles blocking the bike lane on Queens. Almost universally, every trip I make to City Hall, I see that, and it's not a COVID thing. It was a regular occurrence before. So I guess I'm wondering, through you to staff, Madam Chair, recognizing that there are definitely higher order use cycling lanes, just like roads, there are higher order use roads. Has consideration been given to perhaps how we could divide up cycling lanes based on use, and where the higher use ones are designated completely as no stopping? I'm just wondering if that's, you know, the east-west bike lane that's been put in through OEV and is continuing to be worked on, and the Queens Ave one is an example to me that where I do see use. I know that might not be universal across the city. So I'm just wondering if staff have given consideration to that approach.
Mr. McRae?
Thank you. Yeah, the order, I mean, there's no sort of formal hierarchy with respect to bike lanes, but we do have a sense of which ones are busier and sort of higher priority than others. And that does inform the decision making. It was not explicitly integrated into this, but I think that once we've applied the criteria, given that the no stopping zone, so the more rigorous, more stringent requirement does become the more widespread requirement, it does somewhat align. But we're happy to take that feedback.
Councillor Lewis?
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to confess I'm still kind of torn on this one, and I don't know when it comes to council if I may have other ideas, but I do appreciate the work that staff has put into this. It is an ongoing situation that needs some addressing. I just don't know 100% how we get there. So thanks for letting me express my thoughts, and thanks to Councillor Turner for getting some of those points out early so that I didn't have to reiterate them.
Thank you for that. And just for those at home, as from the report, that the criteria being applied to existing bicycle lanes result in 117 kilometers of bicycle lanes with no stopping anytime, with the remaining 16 kilometers being restricted with a combination of no parking anytime and no stopping during peak times. That's the numbers we're questioning here at committee, recognizing different cycling infrastructure has different levels of use during different times and different needs in those communities and neighborhoods. Looking to the committee for any further question or comments. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the councillors so far for this discussion. It's a great report, and I want to start with that by saying I really appreciate this report from staff. It's very thorough, a lot of really good detail. I do share Councillor Turner and Councillor Lewis's concerns about the no parking, recognizing 16 kilometers. When I'm looking at how we're weighing that, so if we're just talking about, say, a delivery person dropping something off, or a courier or something, we're weighing that delivery person's convenience against a cyclist's safety. Because what are the options? The options are the cyclist could get off of his or her bike, dismount, walk for a while on the sidewalk and get back on. That is obviously an option. Or if they're clipping along, they probably won't do that. So they will either ride on the sidewalk, which is now compromising safety of pedestrians, or they jut out into traffic. And if the cyclists were already riding on the road, hopefully, it's not an ideal situation, but hopefully most motorists would have that cyclist in their radar and know to avoid that cyclist. If there's a delivery truck in the way and the cyclist now has to jump out into the road, that makes it less safe. So when this is what I'm thinking of, is this convenience versus safety. And for me, safety is always going to win out over convenience. A delivery person is doing a job, they're playing a role, and part of their job is finding a place to parking their vehicle, getting out and making their delivery however they have to. As I said, 16 kilometers, it's not a lot. These are the retrofits, but we will continue to be doing more of these retrofits as we expand our cycling infrastructure throughout the city. So this may become a larger problem as we continue to build more cycling infrastructure. And right now, you know, we have a point in time where we're looking at current use, but the whole point of one of the points of expanding our cycling infrastructure is to get those cyclists who want to ride their bikes to work, who want to use their bike to commute throughout the city, and yet they don't feel safe right now doing so. They don't have a route. They don't have a protected route. They don't have a dedicated route in their all along their commute, so they're choosing not to cycle right now. So we can't necessarily use that as our overriding focus and guide as how many cyclists are using a particular route right now, because it's not necessarily what could be if we gave them the kind of safe cycling lanes that they need to make this their choice for transportation. So those are my comments for now. Like Councillor Turner, I'm going to keep listening.
Thank you for that. I see no current speakers on the list. If I could ask my vice chair to take over, Councillor Turner, I'd like to make a comment as well.
Councillor Ploza, you're next on my list.
Thank you. And thank you for the discussion today. It's a report that we requested in 2019 and a long time coming back, but definitely worth the wait, as it's a conversation that we need to have about making sure that as we build complete streets and accessibility, that Londoners can choose to use their own neighborhoods for personal use and work use, and do so safely as we're building the infrastructure. I also have the questions if it's an active lane of transportation, are we allowing people to stop in it, to park in it for a period of time? If you want to park in the middle of the road, go ahead. Like, at least a cyclist who doesn't have sheets of metal surrounding them could still commute safely, versus those in personal automobiles. Also questioning, looking at some of my own ward streets, that there's a street here, it is far between side streets, but there's no businesses right in the area. And, you know, there'd be parking allowed at certain, or stopping allowed at certain portions of the day. But the homes in that area have extremely long driveways that could accommodate any deliveries if we were to inconvenience the delivery truck, the movers, or anybody like that, instead of allowing them to simply park and stop briefly on the side of the street, blocking a cyclist lane. In this case, it's on a hill, and I'm not sure how many cyclists like having to stop to dismount on a hill, especially if you're going up it, versus trying to get into traffic if you're coming down it and going at a decent clip, recognizing cyclists can get up to good speeds, and you're never protected as much as those who are traveling in a vehicle next to you. Also aware of many stories that cyclists have of encounters with cars and people not being mindful or believing that they have more right to that road and infrastructure that all Londoners help to pay for. So thank you for the comments today. I'm glad to see some progress in my mind of what we're doing with this. Also recognizing we have a climate emergency and COVID happening right now, that people are choosing different modes and reevaluating some things and discovering hopefully some new pleasures and modes of transportation as they have some time at home. I'll leave that as my comments today, and I'll look for the chair back if Councillor Turner wishes to return it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The chair is yours.
Thank you. Looking for further comments. Councillor Cassidy, your hand still raised. Is that it's going down? Okay, I will need a mover and a seconder for this motion of item 2.7 for the stopping and parking restrictions in bicycle lanes. Or an amendment if someone wishes to do something else with it. Councillor Helmer is moving it.
Yep.
Okay, looking for a seconder. Councillor Cassidy, it has been moved and seconded, and the vote will be up in eScribe in a moment.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Perfect. Moving on to item 2.11, this was pulled by Councillor Turner due to a conflict. It's the 2020 Drinking Water Annual Report and Summary Report for the City of London Drinking Water System. Mr. Mathers is with us if anyone wants questions or comments about how well and safe the city's water is. If not, I will, well, regardless, I'll need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Any questions or comments? Councillor Helmer?
Seems like a good opportunity to remind everyone that, I mean, as far as I know, we're the only city in the world that has water coming from 2 Great Lakes. And I think that we take it for granted sometimes how wonderful the water supply is and how great the staff are who work in this area, both at the regional water supply level and here internal to the City of London. It's something people just take for granted that the water is so great and clean and safe. And I just wanted to say good work.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Any other further questions or comments from committee? If not, Mr. Mathers, did you want to make any brief comments on the performance of the city's drinking water system?
Through the chair, thanks for the opportunity to speak to this item. We're very happy to provide this. This is actually a requirement of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And as you're all well aware, we worked tirelessly to provide this, great gift that we've been given in the City of London of having water supply from 2 sources. And I'd just like to thank all of the really hardworking water operations crew and our wastewater crews as well, working in this difficult time, making sure that we have clean and safe water throughout this pandemic situation. So thanks for the committee's opportunity to speak, and thank you very much and have a great day.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And recognizing too that a lot of councillors serve on either or both of the water boards and help to oversee it that way with our regional partners. So seeing as it's been moved and seconded and there's no further questions or comments from committee, I will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0 with 1 abstain.
That does conclude our consent agenda items. Moving on to items for direction, we do have 4.1, which is a fleet electrification analysis report from LTC. It is just a report, but recognizing this was a point of interest from prior conversations, Ms. Polinsky is with us and made herself available to answer any questions or comments. So if Ms. Polinsky, if you want to go first, if you want to just give a high-level overview of this electrification report to committee. And thank you for making your time and being with us tonight, or, well, we haven't been here that long, but thank you for being with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me. The report provides a summary of the report that the commission received in late November, which was in response to the fleet electrification analysis that was undertaken by QTRIC, which is it's an acronym for the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. Essentially, they have a proprietary predictive modeling method that they utilize to assess the current route structure of a system and determine which routes can be electrified either by buses that would only be depot charged, or which routes would potentially need some form of opportunity charging along the route in order to do a one-for-one bus replacement. Obviously, any route can be electrified if you're willing to purchase additional electric buses and allow a bus to go back to the depot midday if it ran out of power, and you were able to replace that with a second bus. Obviously, that's cost prohibitive. You could be looking at essentially doubling the size of the fleet and all of the costs that go with that. So obviously the model is intended to look for the most efficient way to move forward. And I think I'll sum it up by saying what this report told us is certainly the network as it is right now can be electrified. We also did look at hydrogen. So rather than say electrified, it can be transitioned to green. what it also uncovered is that it's an extremely complicated undertaking. It's not as simple as you or I going out and buying an electric car and having to worry about where we're going to plug it in our garage when we've got it at home. There's all kinds of things that come into this mix, and essentially what the commission directed us to do is take the next step, which is to have a fleet electrification rollout plan developed. And what that plan would include is a year-by-year rollout in terms of which routes make sense to launch first, and plan that out over the continuum. But it would also include an assessment of all of the related financial implications, so that we've got a full picture of what the actual cost will be to fully transition the LTC fleet, whether that's over, it'd probably be over 15 to 17 years if we looked at just our normal replacement schedule, but what the actual implications are. And again, not just costs of the buses, but costs of the charging infrastructure, the infrastructure that may have to go wayside on routes that we would need that opportunity charging, as well as the implications on facility. One of the things that we heard that was a bit of an eye opener is the charging units that are in depot are almost the size of the bus. So where we thought we had lots of capacity within our depots, that's going to be a challenge going forward with depot charging. So all of those things have to be taken into account, and that's really what the next report that will be coming back to the commission will outline. And the intent is that we will have that report back to the commission in time that it can be any suggested path forward into 2022 could be included in the commission's budget submission. So when the commission prepares the budget in August, any 2022 implications could be considered and would be forwarded to council for consideration. I think I'll leave it there and then take any questions.
Perfect. Thank you for that, and for joining us once again with this report and your overview. I will look to committee for a conversation that you would like to have. Councillor Van Meerbergen, and then Councillor Helmer.
Thank you very much for that report, and I must commend the LTC. It's a very realistic, eyes open report presenting what I would see as a very true picture of what we're looking at here. My more specific question is the two technologies, electrification versus hydrogen fuel cell technology. How are they comparing right now?
So in the industry, I would say in terms of rates of adoption, we're certainly seeing a much higher rate of adoption full electric than we are hydrogen. Having said that, we are seeing systems looking more closely at hydrogen. Mississauga is one of the transit systems that's looking at going 100% hydrogen. So they're not looking at electric at all. So there is a slower uptake on that, but not at the same rate that we've seen electric. We've got a number of transit systems across the country that have been piloting electric buses for the last number of years, where hydrogen is really just starting to take off here in Canada.
Councillor?
So I would imagine both technologies are probably evolving at a fairly steady, if not rapid rate. Clearly, you're looking into both of them, and you'll continue to do so?
Yes, that's right. And the reason we looked at both, and I won't get into the details in this report, but there were some routes where even with opportunity charging, it may make more sense to put a hydrogen bus on that route. And that goes to the length of the route and the frequency that it's operating and that kind of thing. So I think it's fair to say most systems are looking at both options and could very well end up with a mix of both electric and hydrogen, and utilize those buses on the routes where they make most sense. So we certainly haven't ruled anything out at this point. We're continuing to assess all the options.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I had several questions, but Ms. Plesny has covered most of them just in terms of her brief overview. She had the major points. I guess what one that's remaining is just when do you think we're going to start to see results coming out of the work that some of the other transit agencies have done through the pilot, through Civic, and starting to see what the performance is like of the buses that are in those fleets now and that are out there running. I know that they've tried out a number of buses in different systems, and I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of when that's going to maybe be more widely known, how those implementations have gone.
So we are starting to see some feedback. TransLink in BC, I would say, is probably the furthest along. TTC has got some buses in service now. They've got a lot of buses on site, but obviously had to retrofit facilities and get the charging infrastructure in place before they could be operating them. So they're really just getting rolling. Brampton and York Region have got their buses, but they don't have them on the road yet. So there is various stages. What I can say from the data that we're seeing from the systems that are operating buses, and it's not really a surprise, the buses are not performing to the levels that the manufacturers are indicating, the type of performance you would get, which obviously could then have an impact on the assessments that we're doing. So the assessments that Civic undertook is based on what manufacturers are saying you should be able to get out of buses, and the systems are not seeing that. So again, it's very early days. It could be the manner in which the buses are, being operated. There's any number of things, but that will continue to evolve, and Civic is committed to continue to adjust their modeling tool, in response to what the actual performance is, so that when we get to the point where we're actually looking at a specific route, we would be able to remodel it based on the current data to make sure that we're putting in place the appropriate infrastructure.
Thank you very much to the chair. I just wanted to say, I think it's really helpful that not only that the study was done, but also that it's being shared with council and with civic administration, because especially when it comes to the capital side, it's important, I think, that London Transit Commission is planning out how this can work, and eventually it's going to be the city that's working through the financing in collaboration with LTC, and making sure that we are on the same page in terms of what is required, how we're going to do that, because small scale electrification is very manageable. The whole fleet over time is a very big undertaking, and when we think about what's going to happen with the facility for transit, how we're going to organize that, how we're going to plan for that in the capital budget, how we're going to maximize the opportunities in front of us in terms of provincial funding that are there now and may not be around forever. I think this is a really crucial time, and I'm glad to see that we're having this back and forth between civic administration and council and the commission itself in terms of planning through electrification. So thanks very much for sharing the report and making time to be here. Hopefully you had other things to do while we talked about hearing about sidewalks.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Ms. Plesny, for coming to speak with us and for preparing this report. All the stuff that Councillor Helmer has talked about already here is quite on point. Just on a procedural side, what's our options for handling the item here? I recognize it's an item for direction, but it doesn't come with kind of pathways for us. Is it just to receive the report and continue on and provide further information at a later date, or is there a direction that we need to provide on this?
From my perspective, this was provided as an update just in response to the fact that the request for this report to be undertaken initially came from council. So this was just the commission's way of putting this kind of the status of where we were at back in front of the committee, and Civic Works is the committee that we report through. Very good. Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, just perhaps to clerks, if there was a special way that we would need to be handled this. It sounds like it's still a live item and there's still more information to come. The commission continues to be seized with this work and reporting back to us, but I'm not sure if we need to provide further direction. I believe at the moment the wording is just going to be put up to receive this report. I'm not aware of anything additional of further reports will be forthcoming as we move through the process. Okay, very good. Okay. Thank you. So just a few questions. I recognize that we do a lot of things on a dollar cost basis. There's kind of a triple E bottom line to all of this though too, and the environmental impact and that sustainability question is
a huge one. And so it's addressed to some degree when we talk about the carbon reductions that are associated with using and shifting to an electrified or hydrogen fleet, and those aren't small. I think what's measured here is fleet-wide. Is that correct? Rather than bus by bus, right? Okay. And so, fortunately, and certainly an issue for debate amongst some, but I think the putting carbon pricing in place allows us to quantify and actually recognize and try to level that discussion, because if we're looking solely at a dollar cost thing, I think it's important for us to also figure out what that carbon cost is normalized into a dollars figure. And cost per ton for carbon is about $50. So if you were to take a look on the fleet side of things at 30,000 tons just on the 40-foot buses, that's about $1.5 million added to the equation annually. If that's the way the calculation would go, there might be some variability to that. It might be directly in the fuel cost, or it might be based on the source emitter itself. So, so those are important, and I think we'll have a bit of a time as we take a look further down the road whether to pull the trigger and move down to procurement. That as we do the cost benefit analysis, that we do a full cost examination, not just on a dollar cost examination. And I'll be really intrigued to see, as Councillor Helmer identified, there's incentive opportunities early on right now that may not be available in the future. There's certainly a scalability component to this. If we wanted to go with a few key routes that worked on an electrified versus the rest that were using either hybrid or diesel buses, there's a big infrastructure sunk cost that's associated with maintaining those routes. And the scalability might just say it just makes more sense to go fleet wide rather than just a targeted specific segment of the fleet. But I really appreciate how thorough and in depth this goes. It looks at route basis, on demand level and stopping frequency, the 40 and the 60-foot buses. It looks at hydrogen. It looks at electric. Perhaps you sense my impatience a little bit, because it's one of those things that I see other municipalities globally really moving towards electrified fleets, and I wonder what our impediments are. I see some of them here, and it's a question of a lot of that tech just coming to Canada and being normalized so that the cost gets driven down, because production. Larger production will result in decreased costs, but as early adopters, it ends up costing quite a bit. So anyway, I really appreciate this. I think this is a direction that we really need to seriously contemplate for moving forward. I think it's important for us to do so. I think it will have an important impact on London's carbon production, because I think there's a variety of things that we can do as government, and there's a variety of things that people need to do as individuals in order to do carbon reductions. This needs to be part of our strategy. So thanks again.
Thank you. Looking to committee for any further conversations about this piece. Okay, well, thank you again for making time to be with us today and hearing the other fun that we deal with for operational matters, and getting sidewalks potentially in place to get even more people to the bus safely. So thank you for that, and we look forward to updates as they become available. So the motion before you is going to be to receive this report. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Helmer, and the vote will be open on eScribe.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Item 5.1 is the Deferred Matters list. To note, it has been revised with any updated reply dates that have been changed due to COVID and some delays coming back with that. So that list is completely updated. The times are as we intend now to move forward and when the committee can expect them. If there's any conversation, we can have it. If not, I will need a mover and a seconder for the Deferred Matters list. Moved by Counselor Cassidy, seconded by Counselor Turner. It will now be open in e-scribe for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
No further additional business that I'm aware of. And if we would like to move to adjournment, I will need a mover for that. Moved by Counselor Turner, seconded by Counselor Van Meerbergen. Do you need an e-scribe or hands? We could do it by hands. All those who would like to go in. Counselor Turner, you're too funny. Okay, our hands are raised, looking for the official results. We're good. I wish you all a wonderful week, and I will see you later. Thank you. And thank you to staff for joining us today, as always, and the public.